Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be part 6 in the series about the pentagram. And so, end of the last one where we went through the number connections, but especially the dimensionality, if that's a word of it, the first, second and third, as well as the fourth dimension and how these numbers lovely connections between them. So now there's what's often referred to another dimension, and that is the dimension of time. So not just the clock, the 12 hours time, 24-hour day, but also astronomical time, and especially precession, which will come into this. So these numbers defining the pentagram. This is a upwards facing pentagram. I'm going to come to it later, but if you include the inverted pentagram, even more. It just so much connections to it. But mentioned earlier the 6 and the 5 connection. There's a lot of very lovely geometry connections, but the seed of life in the 6 and the 5, you see is emblems and symbols, and that's how we got to this earlier diagram. But back to the earlier parts, and the 12-hour clock emerging from the seed of life, and as well as the zodiac signs. Most often, you see your astrology page, but the astronomy connected with these, the weights and the measures that all come together. I'll put a link in the description because I did a video just on the seed of life and the time, the clock, the compass and precession. The same themes from this hexagon, the seed of life, also can be found here in the pentagram. Link in the description. So the pentagram, is it 360 or 0 degrees, 72, 144, 216, 288, these important numbers developing from there, and how it's also in the more tangible, let's say weights and measures, but also the esoteric or the occult as well. And you look through who were the alchemists, who were the hermeticists. They were into geometry, they were into weights and measures as well. So this is why it all comes together. Geometry, measurement of length, or that's a first dimension, but you can then measure area, get the second dimension, and measure a cube, for instance, and you get the third dimension, or volume. But also how time, this is an equinoctial sundial, and it also has a compass built into it, so you can measure time and you have the compass. So weights and measures, the compass to measure angles, the ruler to measure length, as well as second and third dimension, the scales to weight, but especially now these types of clocks where we have, well, time. We also have temperature and pressure. We'll get to those, but so time, the clock, and measure systems, and well, the compass. So time will be the feature for the moment. So time rules everything. Weights and measures, especially time, are the fundamentals of constructing a society, of a civilization, getting things ordered. And so measuring time is just like measuring length, or measuring weight, or measuring temperature or pressure. But so to begin with, 144, so there are 1,440 minutes per day. So on the 12-hour clock face, that means there are 720 minutes on the clock face there. And each hour is divided into 60 minutes, and then each minute is divided into 60 seconds, giving us 3,600 seconds per hour. 144, 72 and 36. So that's some elements of time. But now let's look at the Mayan time, and so they have the Tun, which is 360 days, is 360 degrees in the compass. The Katun, 7,200 days, 72. The Baktun, 144,000 days, 144. The Pictun, 2,880,000 days, 288. However, the Indian and the Yugas, the Vapara Yuga, which is 864,000 years, the sun is 864,000 miles in diameter, and there are 86,400 seconds per day, sun and time blending. But the Para Yuga is broken down into units. So the entry period, 72,000 years, the body of it, 720,000 years, and then the exit period of 72,000 years, 72. We also have the Satya Yuga, 1728 years, that's 864 times 2, but that's also divided into 144,000 years entry, 1,440,000 years the main body of it, and then an exit period of 144,000 years. So Mayan, Vedic / Hindu as well as our current time systems that we all know. Why haven't we gone metric compass? Why haven't we gone metric time, even in metric nations? Because these systems work. And they've tried to do it before, maybe they'll try again. But so we have time and the clock we saw earlier, but that same 12 hours clock is also a good representation of the signs of the zodiac, which is also a reference to time in multiple ways, but especially in what's called the Great Year, or the precessional cycle, which is a measurement of time on a long count, on a long scale, just like the yugas. So the Great Year lasts for 25,920 years. You could just round it off to 26, but the number there, now even the best modern measures have got it within a couple of years of this number, and because of the elliptical nature of all these types of things, there's always a little band going, a variation, but 25,920 years is the Great Year. How does that connect? Well, firstly, think of, you might have seen one of these images, a time lapse of the stars, and they all swirl around, but they swirl around a central point, and that's a very important one. It relates to precession, or the Great Year. That central point is Polaris, the North Star. So to navigators, we know that if you know the North Star, you have a good, even at night time, you have a very, very good idea of what you're doing. If you have an analog clock during the day, you can also measure where north is as well. But that's something else for the moment. But Polaris and North Star, that's where all the stars swirl around. Now the reason that happens is because the precessional cycle, or axial precession, is 25,920 year cycle. And so every 25,920 years, because of the tilt of the Earth, there'll be a long count. So at the moment, Polaris is the North Star. But that's not always the case. That's going to change over 25,920 years. So that's Polaris there, 2000 AD, where we are now. But if you go back in time to Koshab, and then to Tuban, 3000 BC, and then we move back in time, and that's the connect. So the North Star moves in a great circle over a 25,920 year cycle. That's axial precession, the North Star. But it's also usually referred to as the Great Year as the precession of the equinoxes. That's another way to measure it. But okay, before we leave that, consider the Great Pyramid. We have these shafts off the north side, from the Queen's or the lower chamber and the upper chamber. We have these shafts, and it just so happens that these shafts mapped out the movement of precession of the North Star, Tuban and Koshab, 3000, well even 4. There was a period there, but okay, roughly 3000 BC through to 1000 BC, these shafts were tracing out the precessional cycle. So axial precession is the North Star in this big circle. Again, a circle, just like the clock, just like the compass, moving in a circle in a cycle. Now, this is just for illustration purposes, but here we have the sunrise, and just before sunrise, this is the precession of the equinoxes. This is another way of the Great Year, 25,920 year cycle. So I'm in the southern hemisphere, but most people, Europe and Americans, on the spring equinox, if you go out just before the sun rises, there'll be a constellation just behind where the sun rises. That's the precession of the equinoxes. So at the moment, we're entering the age of Aquarius and we're leaving the age of Pisces. So we're entering the age of Aquarius, and because we're right now in the middle of these two, it's depending on what method you use, we've already entered the age of Aquarius, or we will enter the age of Aquarius within the next 2 centuries or something like that, depending on what measure. But we're right in the middle of Pisces and Aquarius, measured on the spring equinox. So on average, because there are 12 signs of the zodiac, or the 12 constellations on the ecliptic as we measure it, so each age, we've just left the age of Pisces on average, that would be 2,160 years, and for the next 2,160 years we're going to be into the age of Aquarius. 25,920 divided by 12, 2,160 years. That's why we get the 216. This is the long count. This is also a measure of time. Just like the 12-hour clock is arbitrary, so are the constellations, but still they chose this for a reason in the past. Now, 25,920 years, if you consider it along with the compass, 360 degrees, so divide 25,920 divided by 360 degrees, we get 72 years. So 1 degree of precession is 72 years. And what's being pointed out back to like Hamlet's Mill and other people who are into this, what's a lovely thing about that, not just because of this angle, is it also pretty much is a lifespan. So if you want to measure this, if you spent your life measuring it, you wouldn't notice it until you reached old age, because it's so gradual, this movement. But one lifetime is about the minimum you need, 72 years, to measure 1 degree of precession because of this gradual movement. It's a generational system to be able to measure this accurately, but in one lifetime you can notice it. And that's why it's not nice, well, lifetime as well. Time in the short term, time in the longer term in these cycles, which just keep coming back to, well, the pentagon and the hexagon. Just so lovely that it's embedded. If we had not used 360 degrees compass, this wouldn't have worked. Nature demanded this certain geometry in the divisions of it, but still 12 hours, 300 or 24 hours or 12-hour clock, or 360 degrees. These were chosen and designed based on natural geometry. It's like, yeah, now, so time, the pentagon, also the hexagon. I'll put that link in the description. But from the macro to the micro, from the 1 meter pendulum marking out 1 second or a 1 Egyptian royal cubit, through to these grand cycles, the same numbers emerging from this same geometry, from the same ancient systems of measure, keep coming back. I like this clock. It's in Canberra, but you've got the Poseidon, Neptune, as well as Hermes, or Mercury, the god of weights and measures. So time, the pentagon, just a quick review, we see just keeps, it's not just in our culture, it's in all these other cultures as well. I'll link in the description, precession on how to draw this, and yeah, lovely thing, lovely connections here. And it's the quadrivium: music, geometry, arithmetic, and astronomy, and these systems of weights and measures, so linked to the lovely proportions defined by nature of the numbers and the geometry. Origins, that's lost in time, but that it is, and it is, and you can find it in all the public buildings, cathedrals, temples, modern and ancient. These systems of measurement and proportion were just, they've left us this, and it's there to be measured, it's there to be tested, it's tangible, and it happens so often that it is the rule. It's an exception not to find it. It is a standard. It is not it just keeps repeated and repeated. They did not build the temples, cathedrals, major public buildings out of some IKEA flat pack standard measurement system. They're all unique, yet they all encompass these same beautiful numbers and proportions. Even though they're all different, it's just a matter of finding a small handful of measurement scales, ancient measurement scales, such as the clock or the foot. We still think of them as modern. No, they're very, very ancient, and there is more than enough evidence to prove that. But anyway, the pentagram, weights and measures, the geometry of all things. Hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.